It's winter. It's truly the most difficult time of year. Just to survive, we've had to basically prepare all year long. And really, it doesn't matter whether we're in the city or in a frontier situation, winter is hard. But in a frontier situation, you can't go down to the store. You've got to have exactly what you need to survive for 3 months. The only store you've got is to go out in the woods and go hunting. And that works, but it's very difficult to survive that way. So we've had to, take all year long to preserve all the things that we're going to be needing this entire season. This is what our pantry looks like here in the cabin. I mean, you think about this cabin, it's a tiny room. It's probably smaller than your garage at home. And yet we've got to figure out how we're going to store a winter's amount of food in this tiny little building. This is just a little example of what you might have as a pantry here in a cabin like this. We've got bags of dried grains. We've got storage canisters that might have pickles in them, all different kinds of things. We might store something dry like sugar, etc. We've got barrels that we will use to store amounts of grain in, jugs to store liquids in. All these things, although, have to be protected. And obviously we need a lot more than that. We might be like living on top of our provisions. And there are even opportunities where we might have to take some of these things outside and bury them in a hole in the ground to protect them and make them last the winter. This is very difficult to have an entire season's worth of food in a tiny little building like this. It's a true challenge, and certainly was a challenge in that time period.
Out here in the wilderness, you can either hunt for food and forage, and it's hard to forage in the winter for the most part. You can use what your animals are giving to you that you have, stored for food and for cream, eggs, that kind of thing, and you have your stores of grains, dried vegetables, pickles, that sort of thing. That's what we've got to use. We're getting a little tired of eating meat. We're getting a little tired of eating what we're hunting day to day. So this recipe lets us use things like eggs, cream, milk, sugar that's stored back, barley that's stored back, and create something that is a little sweet, has a different texture, but still has a hearty grain in it so that you're full when you go to bed at night. We looked through a lot of recipes to find some that would work in this setting, and one that I really liked was in The Lady's Assistant by Charlotte Mason. It is French barley pudding. To a quart of cream, put 6 eggs well beaten, but only 3 of the whites. Then season it with sugar, nutmeg, a little salt, some orange flower water, and a pound of melted butter. Mix with that 6 handfuls of French barley, boiled tender in milk, butter the dish, put it in to bake. It's that simple. We are not, our palates are not about orange flower water these days. We typically see that on a recipe and decide not to use it, so I'm not going to put that in there. All right, I've got our milk in the pan. I'm bringing it up to a boil, and what you have to do, you have to stir this the entire time. You don't want to scorch your milk. You don't want to burn at the bottom, anything like that. You want it to taste good, because this is the base for pretty much everything in the recipe. So I'm going to bring this to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, I'm going to put our barley in, and then we're going to simmer that until the barley is done. And depending on what kind of barley you're using, it'll take different amounts of time, but you'll know it's done. It's like cooking any other grain. We're going to have this recipe because we don't need a huge pudding. That's not what we're going for. Just big enough for a couple of people to eat, and this will do just fine for that. While the barley was cooking, I went ahead in this mixing bowl and I put our cream, I put our eggs, the sugar, and the nutmeg. Now it's time to incorporate the butter. You want the butter fully melted, but you don't want it so hot that it cooks your eggs. So what we're gonna do is let it cool a little bit after you take it off the fire. And then we're going to do a little bit at a time while we're stirring so that we're just incorporating the heat slowly. All right, so also while you're working with this, the point is not to whip the cream. So only stir to incorporate. Don't try to mix everything up together in there. Now we're going to add the barley. Essentially what we've made here is a custard. And so we want this barley to kind of act like a crust. So you don't want to add so much barley that it's all incorporated together. You definitely want more custard than you have barley. So just be a little careful as you incorporate it, not to get too much in there.
Well, we brought Brandon in so he can try this out with us, and well, I don't know, this baked for quite a while. Solidified right up and smells really good.
Yeah,
Really good smell.
Yeah, it's got that classic custard smell to it.
Yeah. That barley really set up. And it's got a good bite to it.
And that nutmeg really comes through in this. We put a lot in there, but man, it's good. I had a little bit more salt to this one than I thought that I would. And it comes through, and it kind of gives that savory feel with the sweet. I like it. You can really bite into the barley. It's got a dessert feel to it, but it eats like a meal.
Oh, yeah.
It's hearty. It is hearty.
Well, and, we're eating it hot. You could even slice this up and, it could be good for probably 3 or 4 days. You could come back to this, especially in this kind of weather.
Man, I love that barley texture.
It's completely different. Really, the sweetness, the texture is different. Everything is different about this than the standard meal that you would have, day in, day out.
Right.
So good.
Yeah. I feel like the texture thing is a big thing, right? Because meat, it's all, it's just the same feel, the same thing. But this has even got multiple textures going on in it. That heavy cream it's very creamy where the barley is not.
Yes.
And you can kind of get that perfect bite that's got everything, or you can separate it a little bit.
Right. It is really good. Well, and these grains aren't ground. So it's a whole step of processing you don't have to do. You don't have to, turn it into flour and all that. You can take that barley and use it right away, right from storage into your dish.
Yeah.
No extra process.
And there are, I think, in a modern sense, when I think of oats, I think of oatmeal, which makes me think of breakfast cereal. Yeah. And coming up in Kentucky, we always mixed jam into that. So it's like a sweet thing, right? But you see so many recipes for oats in soups or in, kind of a stew or a hash kind of setting. And they just go both ways so well.
A wonderful dish that basically comes out of storage, doesn't it? At a time of year when you're eating a monotonous diet day after day, and yet today we get to bring things out of storage and make something special. It's almost a dessert, and yet it's filling enough to be a meal all in and of itself. Such a good one and so easy to do. You should try it. And if you want more on food preservation, make sure to check out this egg preservation video.